Welcome back to the Leadership Forum, a space where corporate leaders share insightful takes on the human side of ingenuity. I'm Saquib, Vali, explorer. Say hi to the future. The leader with us today is Jed Schneiderman, Head of Sales, Digital Advertising, Kijiji, Canada. I caught up with Jed at the last CWA Global Conference in Toronto. We spoke quite a bit about talent, especially in the marketing and digital space, and he had a lot to share. Welcome, Jed, and thank you for taking time out from your talent-inspired schedule.
Great to be here.
All right, Jed, so let's let our listeners hear in your voice how you would wish to introduce yourself to them. Please do highlight your work on and involvement with CleverHire and M2T Collective as you wish.
Thank you. My introductions tend to be curt. I tend to ask people how I can help them, prefer to talk about other people versus myself. But I think my headline is like just a person who really enjoys marketing, media, and technology. I really enjoy the intersection of all three of those disciplines. M2T Collective is a passion project that I started with three other people. And the idea was born out of how could we make a career in media more desirable? It was born out of frustration. So the origin story was I started Tap Mobile in 2011. I was selling media for the first time, having spent 15 years in marketing. And I was really shocked at the way media was bought and sold. And a lot of it really traded on relational equity. And that often was the driver of someone's decision to park money with a partner or a supplier. And having worked on the advertising side, I was shocked at how little of the activity connected back to the business. And I think the challenge there is just media planning and buying is really difficult. Attribution is an age-old problem. And I was sitting down one day with the head of an agency, and I basically said, I've got this crazy idea. I'd really like to start a rotation program, much like a medical internship or a legal articling program for those that are familiar with it in Canada. And I said, wouldn't it be great if you could have someone work on all sides of the marketing ecosystem? So work at a brand, work at a media agency, work at a partner, maybe work at a technology company, and they'd be able to see literally how the dollars flowed all through the system. They'd be able to understand, what different media partners could do. They would understand what results were driven by which media choices. And thankfully, someone bought into my idea, and then we recruited a couple of other companies, and M2T Collective was born. So it's a real passion project. We've been going for about 6 years, and it's had a small but mighty impact on the lives of about 25 or 30 people who have gone through the program.
Very cool. And clearly, I mean, whatever frustration that you were facing at that time, it's been solved now, hasn't it?
Solved for a small number of people. I think our ambitions were grand at the time. We really envisioned this becoming a huge program. We initially sought out to make it the most sought after program in marketing, media, and technology. And I think we've achieved part of that goal. I think it's a little bit smaller than we thought. But hopefully one day there'll be folks doing this full time and the program can grow. But again, I think the lesson, especially in the context of what we're talking about today, I think the lesson sometimes is the quality of the impact one can have on other people, especially in the context of leadership, as opposed to necessarily just the quantity. So again, we've had really good results on the people that have gone through the program. They've landed full-time jobs, they've accelerated their careers, and we've built like a small but mighty program. And that's M2T Collective.
That's cool. That's very nice. I know growing up in the industry that wouldn't it have been great had so I started my career at an advertising agency and then got onto the client side. So had a bit of that, but I can just imagine how much valuable it would be for all the people who are coming up in the industry. And frankly, you also fall in love with the industry as a whole, not just in one specific part. Jed, one of the human conditions that we at Say Hi to the Future explore is around resilience. This whole concept of resilience, specifically the investment that companies and people have to make in order to sustain themselves over a longer period of time. The path you've paved for yourself must have had its highs and lows. What are some stories of grit you can tell that will help our listeners?
I mean, the caveat is that I've had a pretty good life. So I think grit and resilience are contextually relevant. I've had a pretty good life. So I'd say that, examples of resilience in my life would be really not good examples for the vast majority. I mean, I think probably the best example is starting my own company in 2011. And just having the door slammed in my face over and over again. And so we knew we had a good idea, and that was to launch a mobile advertising company. Again, this is back in 2011. This was to be billed as about the 8th or ninth year of the year of mobile. And we looked at the market, we looked at the data, and we knew there was a good opportunity. We just had never built a business before, and we were doing something quasi new in the market. And so for us, resilience was literally just getting up every day and knowing that we had to sell more and drive revenue. It's interesting. I was just listening to a Howard Schultz interview on the Acquired podcast, and he was talking about when he first went out to raise money for Starbucks. He, in fact, didn't start Starbucks, but was trying to acquire it. And he said that he went out and basically spoke to over 200 investors before he was able to put together the money to acquire the company. And he said his training at Xerox, which was basically cold calling and getting people saying no all the time, gave him sort of the strength and endurance to then go through the Starbucks experience. So I think resilience for us was knowing that we had a good idea, getting the door slammed in our face, folks tell us no. But I think the key takeaway and the key insight was at the end of every day and every week, reflecting back on what went well and what didn't go well, and then making subtle adjustments. So whether you buy the concept of 1% better every day, or the idea of like a mindset that's open to change or self-reflection, what was really good for us was rather than just saying, okay, they said no, and then trying the same thing again, it was, okay, what can we learn from this? So I remember vividly going to see a large client in our first month, and they told us that our pricing was all wrong. And so we reworked our pricing, and we went back to that client. We also figured out other ways of gathering data. So for us, resilience was keeping, like, pushing one foot in front of the other, but also knowing what to change and when to change it.
Yeah, and that in itself is a great story to be told, Jed. And I understand that, there's a notion of resilience which is all about how you fall down and get back up. Like, I mean, I understand that. There's another aspect of resilience, which is people who have the penchant for pain. Like, I mean, what I'm saying by that in a good way is you had a really good career going for yourself at Procter, but there's got to be some motivation that says, hey, you know what, I'm going to let go of that comfort and go into something launching Tap Mobile, which got acquired. But then you didn't just go and do something regular. You went ahead and started the M2T Collective and the CleverHire project. And so I think this resilience aspect of, and when I say that, I say that in the best possible way, that some of us, myself included, have this desire for punishment, but that punishment in a good way, for a higher purpose, for a calling that we're going for. So maybe there's another aspect to it that you might want to reflect on.
I think there's a couple ways of answering the question. I think I would describe myself as a fixer or a problem solver. And I think the way I answered your previous question, which is if you do something and you don't get a good result, ask yourself, is there a better way? So, M2T Collective was, we really thought there was a way to make the industry better. And so I think to say that we were out to change the world is a bit lofty. But to your point around punishment or trying something new, the truth is, for those tuning in, the world is such a big place. There is so much
Right.
opportunity. There is so much to do better and leave an impact. I mean, these are some of the things that I do publicly, but there's lots of things that I do quietly and privately behind the scenes. But I think what I like to do is that when I see problems, I like to fix them. And sometimes, again, for those tuning in, the idea of resilience is to figure out what are the problems that fascinate you, what are the problems that challenge you, and what's the best way to go about and change those. So in the case of M2T Collective, I found a number of other people that wanted to solve those problems with me. CleverHire, we think basically we have a better way to help companies hire more quickly and more effectively. So I think a lot of people, when they see a problem, they either like to just throw their hands up and say, well, it's too big a problem to solve, or in some cases, they like just to throw out their opinions. I kind of like to dig in. I've always liked helping people. That's the root of both CleverHire and M2T Collective. I like helping other people. And so the idea of helping other people and then applying it to solve a problem is something that is just a personal motivator. So again, back to your question and back to your comment, whether it's an affinity for pain or a glutton for punishment, again, I think what's critical for folks to realize is what motivates them.
That's right.
So what I always believe people should do is like make two charts. What are you good at? What are you not so good at? What do you like doing and what do you not like doing? And so you can make it as two charts or a 2x2 matrix. And the stuff that you're good at and the stuff that you really enjoy, if there's an economic model to be attached to it, those passion projects can be really good businesses for people to pursue.
For sure. Each time that there is a problem that's out there and you feel like, hey, if you're good at it, then you'd like to go fix it. Each problem, then, like you said, some people might just throw their hands up and say, I'm sorry, this is too big. But then the idea is, how do you look at some things and start to unwind each of those little aspects that can get you somewhere? That in itself, for a lot of our listeners, has been played back to us as that's resilience in itself, right? So it's just one of those things that some of us are wired to do and some of us are not. But good. If I can get your leadership take on ingenuity, especially on the human side of ingenuity, give me an example of when it has worked well, or an example when it has not, and what have you learned? How would you change some things?
So I'll probably answer the question in two ways. I mean, the model that I subscribe to with respect to leadership is the 3E model, and it was something that I learned at my time at Procter and Gamble, which is envision, enroll, and enable. And so I think when you think about leadership, it's setting a vision, meaning something that you want to accomplish in the future. We thought with M2T Collective, we could create the most sought after program for folks wanting to get into media after likely some level of schooling. In the case of CleverHire, what we want to do is we want to address hiring yield. We want to help basically people spend way less time finding the best candidates and more quickly. And so once you have a vision, then basically the enrolling part is how do you get other people excited to help you out? And then knowing that we can only do so much in a day, that's the enablement. Like, how do you arm people to go out and do stuff? So to give you a specific example, ingenuity in a lot of cases is just connecting the dots. So there's a handful of startup books that talk about like what's the one thing that that no one else does. Like, what is the insight? What is the critical piece of information? It could be IP, it could be an insight. For us, ingenuity, and the best example is CleverHire. We found a bunch of different things that we put together. So the origin story of CleverHire was, again, as I said earlier, we've always liked to help people. About a year ago, in the first half of 2023, a lot of tech companies were laying off a lot of people, and a lot of folks were sort of asking publicly for help. So one of the things that I went off and did was I created a Google spreadsheet. I put in about 41 jobs. I sorted it. It was highly curated around marketing, media, and technology, which is a passion, that I sort of effectively crafted for myself over the course of 25 years. And I put together this sheet and it got a lot of favorable response. A lot of people were really grateful. And eventually I built the sheet up to about 500 jobs. and people were like, oh, wow, this is a great resource. And by the way, if you go online, if you go to LinkedIn, there's loads of other people doing this. So at the time, I was really just trying to help people. What I started to uncover was that a lot of jobs were getting filled right away. So job posting sites would either take applications down or close applications. And again, started to just do a little bit more research. I started to ask people. I started to do some investigation. And the conclusion that we drew was that recruiting was a speed game. Basically, if you didn't get your resume in early, you had no chance of getting an interview. And if you didn't know someone within the company, you had a tough time getting it. So we're like, this is interesting. And it came about because people were giving us feedback. They said, Jed, your sheet's out of date. A whole bunch of these jobs are already filled. So we went back and once or twice we scrubbed the list and we said, this is kind of interesting. And what I learned from the M2T Collective was a really robust program. Companies like LinkedIn and Starbucks and Intuit and Publicis Media and yes, Kijiji are all part of the program. And after about 6 years, while we get more applicants every single year, it's not a hockey stick. And why? That is because we ask people to apply with a video. And we know that it's extra work and it's by design. So Ingenuity, in the case of CleverHire, we combined like 3 different insights. A curated job board works really well. A video application cuts down on the number of people, and essentially those that apply are really motivated. And then lastly, we by combining all of those things, it became less of a speed game, right? So you had fewer people applying for a discrete number of jobs, and you couldn't just hit like auto submit. So a lot of large job portals allow you to just submit a resume without doing any extra effort. So Ingenuity, in my opinion, Ingenuity isn't necessarily one idea that you go out and execute. Ingenuity is a lifetime of learning, a lifetime of reading. I'm a voracious reader. That's one of the reasons why we're doing this session today. And Ingenuity is like almost looking at breadcrumbs or looking at a bunch of different things and asking yourself, well, what if we added this? Or what if we subtracted this and putting it together? And it's constantly tweaking and constantly innovating. So right now, CleverHire is just a passion project. We've been incubating it for over a year now, and we keep iterating, and we're trying to see if we have product market fit. So questioning oneself, not holding some ideas too strongly. So there's this wonderful expression, strong opinions loosely held. And so the idea that you could be proven wrong at any point in time is those are some of the aspects of Ingenuity, in my opinion.
It's fascinating, Jed. And the reason I was intently listening to your journey and the origin story of CleverHire and where you are, there are a few different things in there. I mean, it started off with just a little bit of curiosity, right? And then you brought in your passion for helping people, so combined it there, and then you got the audacity to take some actions, right? Just be audacious enough and take some steps. Uh, make a Google form sheet and then send it out. And somebody might say, well, really, in this age of technology, is that the best you can do? Yeah, that's a start, right? And look at where each of these steps. So your idea or the problem you were solving was not a better mousetrap. You were just trying to help some people. And along the way, the mousetrap just gets designed slightly differently as you continued, because that's exactly where Say Hi to the Future is all about. It's about people who have the curiosity to just ask some questions, the passion to bring whatever they can do well and make that happen, and frankly, the audacity to take some actions. So this is exactly right. In the area of where we are having this conversation, and thank you for sharing that. It's brilliant. What I'd love to do is just get a feel for a few quick ones, which is if I was just to ask you about leadership and in the people whom you, not just as part of CleverHire, but also just at Kijiji where you work, what do you look for, groom for, and nurture in the people you hire?
I think there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, I think ultimately hiring for attitude is probably one of the number one things that I look for. So I think as I've alluded to earlier, I think, there's something that you can train and coach, and there are some qualities that are innate. People who have a can-do attitude, people who are innately curious, people who always want to get better, those are typically the folks that I want to find on my team, because leadership really is about creating opportunity for people. And I think those are some of the requirements for a good leader. So someone who's curious naturally asks good questions. Someone basically who really wants to get stuff done is probably quite good at priority setting. And so all of those things are, to me, foundational pieces of leadership. Again, I go back to the 3E model, which is envision, enroll, and enable. So even when we're talking to new team members here at Kijiji, even when we're looking at promoting folks, really seeing whether or not people understand that they can't get everything done on their own. They need to treat other people with respect. They need to be, somewhat organized and process oriented. They can basically provide proof that they're strategic thinkers. And folks that can put all of those things together are ultimately really good leaders. I do subscribe to the servant leadership mindset. So I think there's also a healthy dose of humility, the willingness to be proven wrong. Again, just to harken back to this acquired podcast with Howard Schultz, he talks about how a lot of their product ideas came directly from customers, people who want to add different things to their drinks. And that's how a lot of their drink and menu items got developed. So they said they've got up to roughly 100,000 different combinations of ingredients for beverages. And it was a lot of the times customers telling them what they wanted. So I think a key part of being a leader is someone who's just open to new ideas. But I do think a lot of it comes down to attitude, in addition to the other things that I mentioned, things that you can't really train for.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I guess the part is you can't train for hunger, you can't train for desire, you can't train for attitude. I'm with you. The area that I personally stumbled in a lot of ways, Jed, is looking for that individual that has the right attitude or the right hunger and the right desire. That's generally a little more tricky as compared to looking for something which is very transactable, right? Because then you can put in some tests and you can put in some easy ways of measuring. Any thoughts on that?
I think what comes to mind is there's a very well-known tech company, a global company. And what they used to do as part of their interview process was that, unbeknownst to applicants, this is in pre-COVID days where a lot of interviews were done in person. What they would often do is the first person to greet the individual would often be a receptionist or someone in an administrative role that would check them in. What they did, this company, was they often solicited that person's feedback after the whole interview process was over.
Ah,
So
ah,
the idea being is, how you treat anyone in the organization is often telling as to how you would treat people in the
sure.
working world. The late David Thompson was famous for treating everyone in his organization with kindness and respect. So I don't know that there's a perfect way of doing it. I think there are little tells or little signs. When I'm hiring, when I'm interviewing, I often wait to see what happens when the interview is done. Does someone thank me for their time? Does someone send me a thank you note? Folks that are really young and looking for their first job or looking for a new job, I'll tell people send in their resume and cover letter in the mail, and they'll ask me, well, why would I do that? And I said, well, how many people do you think do it? And they're like, probably none. So I'm like, why wouldn't you do it? And it's the same reason why I say to people, send a handwritten thank you note. They're like, well, why would I do that? And I said, well, think of how many people would actually do that. So I don't have a great answer for your question. I think the little things count. And I think perhaps a better way of answering the question and helping people is ask for values, right? You can test for values. So if your company has values, if you as a leader have values, you can ask people for examples that demonstrate they have the same values as you. And again, I think those two hacks or those two methods fill in some of the gaps, because I think knowing exactly how someone will perform on the job and over a long period of time is quite hard to predict. But I would suggest little things like that to build a more robust and more accurate picture.
See, one of the places I thought you would go in, and I'm gonna force the discussion there just because you're with me, is this whole notion where you for CleverHire, what you try and do is get somebody to submit a video, right? Or do a
Yeah.
video interview, or do they submit a video?
They answer questions
Got
over
it.
one video.
What kind of questions do they answer?
They ask, they answer whatever questions the employers put in front of
Got
them.
it. Got it.
Yeah.
And so is there a sign in there? Because that's a key differentiator that you've got for yourself, right? Which is you ask for somebody to send in a video. So is there a, do you coach, do you guide the employers to ask a question of a certain nature that might give you some of those tells in the video that people might submit?
We make suggestions, but I think, if for example, if you're interviewing someone, you might have, the 3 or 4 questions that you want to ask right away in an interview. The insight is that a lot of people just apply for jobs without putting in any effort. That's the insight. So what we're trying to do is we're
Create
trying,
some friction?
correct, create
Oh,
some.
got it. Okay.
Secondly, is we create a mechanism that once you record the video, that answer can be shared within your organization. So if you are conducting an interview with me and no one else is in the room, other people in the organization are requiring on your opinion. They're relying on your opinion of me in the interview. So this makes it more objective. We can't control for bad questions. We can't control for a lot of other factors. But if one records a video, the same way one would go and watch a video on YouTube or Netflix, the idea is a whole bunch of videos could be sent out to folks within an office. You could rank them all, and then you basically could decide which folks to bring back for a second interview. What you also know is that if a lot of people don't, if they don't want to submit a video, you're just not going to interview them. It's part of the process. So, I mean, the bottom line is applying for a job has become way too easy. Back to your comment about the Google Sheet, not technology doesn't always solve every problem. I think technology in the case of recruiting has created a signal to noise problem in that we speak to folks all the time. And if you get 400 applicants for a job when all you need is one, 400 applicants could very well be a crushing burden for a hiring manager or a small business operator. And if you got 3 or 4 applicants and all of them were good and you only needed to hire one, at the end of the day, we're just trying to help people find that one person more quickly and with less effort.
See, and this is where I think even the time when you and I met at the CWA, what got me so into that, hey, Jed's got to be in this conversation with me, where the entire world is going to make stuff frictionless. You said, hey, let me add in some friction because this whole idea of some bit of friction will help me distill the signal from the noise. Now, that's a concept. I'm not suggesting that's Jed invented that concept, but boy, I'm not so sure if there are lots of people who might clue into that insight today in the way you have, and I think it's making a huge amount of difference. And I think it goes beyond just a hiring decision. To me, this is just beyond in a lot of cases where taking the friction away might make it very pervasive and democratized and all that sort of stuff, but that's not necessarily the right answer.
Yeah, I mean, 3 thoughts come to mind. Again, not to obsess over Howard Schultz, but he talked about how mobile ordering for Starbucks has been both a very good thing and a very bad thing. So, from memory, I think about a third of all transactions are through their mobile app. What he's talked about, though, is Starbucks was the third place. Starbucks was
That's
the
right.
place outside of home and work that you would go to. And now all of a sudden getting a drink from Starbucks is entirely transactional. So you spend no time in the place. He talks about story after story about how different what he calls partners, meaning the folks that work in the store, knew your dog's name, knew your dog's birthday. And so it became a reason to go and get a coffee because it was a connection. That is all gone with the mobiles. So that's one example. Secondly, all you have to do is watch. I have teenage children at home. All you have to do is watch how kids socialize on their phone. And then when they're in front of another person in a room, they freeze and they don't know how to communicate. So, again, two good examples of how at the end of the day, work gets done by people. Again, in the context of what we're talking about, leadership is about getting other people to follow you in order to march towards a goal. And sometimes that can be really easy. Sometimes it can be difficult, circuitous, arduous, and the like. But if leadership is about getting people to follow you, you want to know that people can put in the time, put in the effort. So back to CleverHire, you can call it friction. We just want to know that people really care about the job. And if all people are doing is hitting easy apply on some application because they think hiring is a numbers game, when in fact it's not, that's what we're trying to change. And we know that hiring is really difficult. So again, we're not trying to say we have an answer for better hiring in aggregate. What we're saying is we've identified a couple of pieces in the process that are entirely broken. You don't need 400 applicants for a job. You just need a couple of good ones that you can interview. What you also want help with is screening out those folks. No one wants to admit it publicly, that within the first 5 minutes, the person's not a fit. So by looking at a couple of answers over video, you will screen out those folks that basically you would never hire. And the benefit is you save time for applicants, and you also save time for you and if you interview with other people. So if someone has booked a 1-hour interview and it's a panel interview, that's 3 hours of time. Most people, if they realize within the first 5 minutes they don't want to hire someone, they probably aren't going to end the interview there. We do hear stories occasionally that folks do it, and hopefully they do it professionally and gracefully. But most people aren't going to do it, which means you've lost 3 hours of time.
That's right.
Four if you include the applicant.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And then I think the way I'd wrap this up, Jed, is there's a concept out there that all friction is bad. What I'm hearing is not all friction is bad. However, the friction that you do put shouldn't be a nuisance. It should either be a way of delighting the person who's going through the friction onto something that's unexpected, like in the case of the mobile app or the lack of a mobile app, for example, at a Starbucks, or it should be a friction design for learning, like in the case of kids who will start having a better understanding on how to communicate when they're with people. So this has been fun. Look, I'm sorry, and I understand I'm having a ton of fun, and the time goes by fairly quickly. You've got some amazing things to share. But before we end this, what I'd love to ask you, Jed, you came into this with certain thoughts of yours. I generally go into it with some questions and conversation guides that I have in mind. Is there anything that you wanted to share that I never got to just because of my way of asking questions? Please, this would be a time I'd like to leave. I'd like to give you the last word.
No, I mean, I think, I think the conversation was quite stimulating. I appreciate that you pressed me in a couple of areas for greater clarity. I mean, I think the parting thoughts are, we can always learn from every conversation that we have. And so, there's that famous expression, we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And so I think, the gift is every time you talk to someone, you can ask questions and learn a lot. And I think the act of learning, listening to other people and then processing it and doing something with that information is something that maybe all of us could do a little bit better and a little bit more often.
Thank you again, Jed. Thank you for taking the time and sharing your insights. Our listeners would love to hear more from you. We will tag you, Kijiji, CleverHire, and M2T Collective in our show notes. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.